One of the big misnomers that a lot of people have is that we can stretch a muscle. You can't stretch a muscle. That's actually physiologically impossible to stretch a muscle. And let me clarify, let me sort of be very clear on that. What allows a muscle to stretch is your signals coming from the central nervous system that says to the actin and myosin, like if you were to, for your listeners, picture taking 2 bags of spaghetti and bringing those ends of spaghetti together so it kind of, they overlap each other. That's actin and myosin. That's how the muscles contract and relax. The only thing that allows that muscle to start to relax is a signal from your central nervous system. If you take a bicep muscle, go back to that muscle again, it's been damaged a little bit and it only opens so far. You can't stretch your arm right out because of the damage in the bicep. You can take your other arm or put a weight into it or a pulley and you can force it open. What you're doing there is you're tearing the muscle fiber. The central nervous system's not actively involved in letting go of it. So you're just tearing it. And what'll happen is when you do that, I see people doing it in the gym all the time. I see people doing it in physio. They tear it open. It feels good because the natural endorphins come in, it kills all the pain, and they think, oh, that's great. Look at my arm. It goes all the way open. They get up the next morning and it's just as tight again. And they do this month after month after month. So if you really want to work with your fascia and you want to really open the body up, you've got to allow the central nervous system to be an active participant in that movement.
Hello everybody and welcome to Truehope Cast, the official podcast of Truehope Canada, where we take a deep dive into mental health's many physiological and psychological aspects. This is the show for you if you're looking for motivation, inspiration, knowledge and solutions, and that's what we're all about here at Truehope Canada. Truehope Canada is a mind and body based supplement company dedicated first and foremost to promoting brain and body health through non-invasive nutritional means. For more information about us, you can visit truehopecanada.com. Today on the podcast, I welcome Cameron Moffatt. Now, Cameron is an osteopathic practitioner who resides and practices in Victoria, BC. His approach to healthcare is based on a fundamental belief that your symptoms are not your root problem, but rather the starting point to help you express full and abundant health. Today on the podcast, we're going to be discussing Fascia 101, what it is, why it matters, and how it can keep you healthy. Enjoy the show. Okay. Hi, Cameron. Welcome back to Truehope Cast. How are you? What is going well?
Thank you, Simon. It's good to be back, actually. What's going well? The practice is going well. Life is going well, and I'm anxiously and excitedly waiting for spring. So I've had enough of winter.
Yeah, aren't we all? It's always that time of year where people start to feel that energy shift, and it's quite interesting how we go from that kind of hibernation stage and how we're so beautifully connected with the seasons, and then everyone gets so excited about the springtime and the heat and the warmth and the fact that we can go outside a little bit more. Yeah, it's an interesting, energizing time for sure. Yeah. But we're going to be talking about fascia kind of 101 today. Maybe you've heard of the term fascia, people are listening there and watching, but we're going to dive a little bit into more detail there in regards to what it is, why it matters, and how to keep it healthy and why that's important. But before we jump into that, Cameron, do you mind just giving us a little bit of a introduction for those people who don't know who you are tell us a little bit about that, please?
Sure. So thank you. So my name is Cameron Moffatt. I've been an osteopathic practitioner now for over 30 years. I have a background in marathoning and triathloning, and I've been studying martial arts for, again, about over 30 years now. So when Simon asked me to talk about fascia, I was really excited about that because in all those endeavors I just mentioned, including even just becoming an osteopath and using my brain cells, your fascia has a huge influence in all of this. And it's one of those tissues that people just don't talk about. When I was in training in school, in the anatomy, they more or less just cut the fascia away and said, ignore it, look at the muscles, look at the organs. But now the current research is really indicating that fascia is hugely important, way more important than it was given credit for maybe 2 decades ago.
And it's funny that with conventional allopathic medicine, you talk about the cutting that away and don't worry about it, it's not that important. And then years later, we find out that it's a very vital, important part of our biology. I mean, why would it be there if it wasn't functional and didn't have a purpose, right? So
exactly.
That's a very important point right off the top that we should certainly cover. But let's start with the basics here. Like, what exactly is fascia and why is it important to our overall health?
Okay. Well, if anybody's ever looked at a piece of meat, like a steak, and you see that white lines between the red meat, those red lines or white lines are in fact actually the fascia. One of the big misconceptions people have is they think fascia is on the outside of the body and acts like an envelope, and that's not quite accurate. Another way to look at fascia is if you were to picture a sponge with all of its holes. The sponge is full of all kinds of holes. The sponge would be the fascia, and the holes are where we put the body parts. But we don't take, like your bicep muscle in your arm, as an example, we don't take the whole bicep and just put it into one hole. We take a little sliver of the bicep and put it into one hole, another little sliver into another hole, et cetera, until eventually that area of the sponge, we just arbitrarily call it the biceps muscle. If you wanted to take the bicep muscle out of the body or out of that sponge, you've got to cut a whole bunch of that sponge or the fascia with it. So fascia really is the very integral tissue that supports and holds on to and keeps everything in your entire body in its place. Fascia is so tough that when fascia and a bone go at war with each other, if they're out of balance, the fascia will actually tear a piece of bone apart. That's what's called often known as shin splints. Shin splints are where usually it's runners or people using their legs incorrectly. The fascia gets so tight that it actually pulls a piece of the tibia right off, a shin splint, and it's quite serious. But on the other hand, fascia has to be so flexible and so mobile that it allows us to raise our arms or move our bodies. When your fascia tightens up, you are not moving your arm or your body. So fascia is really important. And like I mentioned earlier, it's often ignored, especially in not even in allopathic medicine, but in many of the physical therapies. People tend to kind of bypass the fascia, which is not correct.
And what's it actually made of? I think that's obviously an important piece in regards to how you would potentially nourish, and also how you would treat it if you were looking to work with the fact that it needs to be flexible, it needs to have that elasticity to it. So what's the actual construct?
Okay, I'll answer your question in a second, but I'll kind of come around a bit of a circle. Think of fascia as another way, as the saran wrap we use to cover up our food. Imagine a layer of saran wrap, a layer of water, a layer of saran wrap, a layer of water, etc. Sometimes hundreds and thousands of layers. The saran wrap is the fascia, and the fascia is made of collagen. That's the connective tissue. But the water in between the two layers and multiple layers of the collagen, the water is what gives the collagen or the saran wrap the ability to glide and move. So when we're talking about fascia, we're talking about the collagen, but we're also talking about a really important part of that is the hydration of the fascia. And when you talk about the hydration, you've got to look at whether or not that hydration is clean. So you can have lots of hydration in there, but it becomes very dirty. Then it's almost like throwing some sand into the water that cools your, the motor of your car, or the grease in the axles of cars. That fascial water has to be clean as possible. And then that means you have to then look at your liver and your kidneys. Those two organs are major detoxification systems of the body. And if the liver and the kidneys are not doing their job, they're going to dump those extra toxins somewhere. And the kidney always deals with water-based toxins, and the liver always deals with oil-based toxins, fat-based toxins. So the kidneys are going to, if they get overloaded, the kidneys are going to start to dump some of those toxins, water-based toxins, into the biggest source of water, and that's going to be the fascia.
Oh,
so
interesting.
A really good example of that is, let's say somebody goes away for a week, they go down south, go to an all-inclusive, and then they drink way more alcohol than they normally do. They come home, 2 weeks later, they've got a sore back, or their neck is bothering them, or they notice that their shoulders are not quite moving the same way. They can't raise their arm as much. That's an example where the kidneys have gotten overloaded from the alcohol, can't handle the toxicity. So they start dumping the byproducts, these poisonous byproducts of alcohol, back into the water systems of the fascia. Now the fascia is starting to basically get kind of gooey. Do you remember when you were a kid and you made, maybe your parents made you Jell-O?
Yeah.
When you first made it, the Jell-O is nice and slippery, and you can barely pick it up. It's so slippery, right? But leave that Jell-O on the countertop for a day uncovered. Now you've got basically a hard gunk, a piece of goo. That's what fascia becomes when it becomes toxic. When the water becomes toxic, it becomes gooey, sticky. So now you can't move your body the same way, because it's basically, again, that sponge scenario I mentioned earlier has now become dehydrated, or dehydrated and toxic.
So we've got these layers of fascia, and fascia is, can you just give me some examples? Is it surrounding muscle? Is it surrounding organ? Is it surrounding bone? Like, where are we finding this? Because I imagine if you were to look at all of the fascia of the body and laid it out flat, it would be extensive. It's like when you talk about the lining of the digestive tract, and it's like a couple of tennis courts. Like, what's any idea in regards to like how much connective, how much collagen of the fascia we're talking about here?
You know, I don't know if anybody's ever actually measured it, but I can tell you this: there's nowhere in the body there is not fascia. There's nowhere. So as an example, we have Tom Myers was a guy that he was I believe he was a physiologist. He did quite a bit of extensive cadaver studies on fascia, and what he found was that there were certain concentrations of fascia in the body. So he laid out these basic lines where the fascia is the most concentrated, and there's maps you can buy of his now that are quite useful in treating. But there's a line of fascia that goes from your forehead all the way along the back of your head, all the way down your back, through the buttocks, down the back of the legs, goes around the Achilles tendon. The Achilles tendon basically is just a whole bunch of fascia that was sheath in your leg that now gets wrapped up into like a tube. Achilles tendon is just a bunch of fascia. So then it goes around your heel and goes and attaches to the very base of your toes. That's just one line that goes all the way along. And there's also corresponding front lines that go from the forehead all the way down through the lungs, all the way through all the visceral organs in the body, down the front of the legs, down through the knee. Again, that patellar tendon, that tendon you have right at the bottom of your kneecap, that gnarly thing you have down there, that's just basically fascia that has been concentrated into a very distinct area, and we call it a tendon. Tendons are just basically fascia. Wow. And that fascia goes all the way down. So when you ask me where is it, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
You can't go anywhere in the body and not bump into fascia, because go back to that scenario of the sponge. The sponge is the fascia. Anytime you poke in the body, you're poking into the sponge of the fascia immediately. It's on the surface. It's also right down. One of the recent studies has more or less proven that the cell's wall is a form of specialized fascia. Every single cell, and there's 60 trillion cells in our body, every single cell is wrapped around it with the wall is fascia. So fascia is everywhere.
Yeah, just looking at that Tom Myers image, and I'll add a link in the show notes, because there's some very beautiful imagery in regards to it. And I think if you can imagine, if you're listening, when you look into like an anatomy 101 textbook, you'll see like the circulatory system, which is usually, I think, yellow, and then you'll see the nervous system is in blue, the circulatory system in red. You see these maps of the body. There is clearly one for fascia here, and it is all over the place. You know, it's connective, it crosses the body multiple ways, and as you say, it goes absolutely everywhere. So that's very, very cool that we've actually got this a little bit more of an understanding about what is fascia, and there are other people talking about this, because yeah, it sounds like the allopathic model is not caught up as much as it could be, and it sounds like there could be many common issues people are walking around with that is down to a fascial problem.
Exactly. To name a couple, plantar fasciitis, which is a type of symptom when people get out of bed in the morning and it feels like they're walking on glass. Plantar fasciitis just means inflammation of the fascia. Plantar is the bottom of your foot. That's a really common one. And again, you can treat the fascia in that little area and try to work it and try to loosen it up and try to heal it and put yourself on anti-inflammatories, et cetera, et cetera. But again, like I mentioned, that line of fascia goes from your toes through the arch of the foot, around the heel, and all the way up to the front of your forehead. So to treat the fascia in one very select area is very short-sighted. You have to treat the whole line. And
amazing.
because that line, and particularly that line, goes right by and wraps around the kidneys, with plantar fasciitis, the first question I always ask myself when someone comes in the office with this is, how toxic are they? Where is the toxic load coming from? And why is it being dumped into the feet? One of the things your listeners could try doing is, if you were to take your left hand and actually grab a hold of whatever you're wearing in the way of a shirt, grab a hold of your shirt. Some, you try this as well.
Doing it.
Grab some of the take your left hand and just grab your shirt on the right side, right around the bottom of your rib cage. Get a good fistful of it and tighten it right up. Now try raising your right arm. Go ahead and try raising your right arm. You'll notice how you can't raise it.
No.
Right? Now let go of the shirt. All of a sudden the arm comes up. Frozen shoulder, which is commonly seen more with women, especially perimenopausal women, than any other group. Frozen shoulder used to be called adhesive capsulitis. It turns out that's not true at all because there's no adhesions within the capsule of the shoulder. What it is, it's a hormonal problem that has come about because the liver is not functioning properly and the fascia is becoming intoxicated and locks up that whole region in the soma, the thorax. The fascia tightens up so much that the poor little deltoid muscles, which aren't really that strong of a muscle, can't raise the arm enough because the fascia is pulling back down on it. So anytime you have a dysfunction in the body, particularly when it's a mechanical dysfunction, you've really got to look at the fascia.
Yeah, it makes so much sense because when I play a lot of soccer in the summer seasons here in BC, I certainly get that plantar fasciitis, and it's usually after a game. It's in one foot, and it is like walking on glass, and it's brutal. And I've never really thought about it being like a fascial issue, especially like you're going to put your attention on where the pain is, and that's kind of like what we initially do, which would make sense, but what we don't really have a good concept of is if I've got pain somewhere in my body, we only focus on that particular area. We might not think beyond that bone or that muscle or that part of you, which is I guess it's natural that we obviously have those we have the sensory pain that we were actually going to experience. So we're going to be focused on a very particular area. But if you look within medicine as well, we have like specialists for everything. We have like doctors for fingers, we have doctors for wrists, we have doctors for elbows, and they don't really look outside of their scope. So when you're talking about like plantar fasciitis in my foot, I have to be looking at like a whole body experience. I have to be looking back at my hydration levels, and it's just interesting that we get so myopic in that view of that one reductionist idea, that we don't like take that step back and look at all of the things that make us up and how these things are beautifully connected within our bodies.
Exactly, and that's where I know I'm biased, I admit that, but that's where osteopathic therapy really is very good at doing that, stepping back. I used to teach at a couple of colleges, and I was always trying to get the students to, the brain wants to immediately come up with a solution. And as a clinician, you've got to step back from that initial assumption you're making. Well, this is probably this. Step back and ask a lot more questions and basically try to prove yourself wrong in that first assumption. And if you can, then you're onto something else. A good example of plantar fasciitis, a couple of years ago, I had a person come in who all of a sudden it flared up, and there was no real reason why. Nothing had changed much. They didn't change their diet. But after extensive questioning, what had happened was they'd had 2 root canals done, and at the back of their molars, and the tissue of the tongue, when you're developing as an embryo, comes from C1, C2 in your spine. Those tissues migrate forward and become the tongue. So they're intrinsically linked together. So having the jaw open for, I think it was 2 hours twice in this root canal process, had basically spasmed all the tissue at the back of the throat, the back of the tongue, and had pulled C1, C2 slightly out of alignment. Well, again, the fascia, remember that C1 and C2, the first and second vertebrae in your neck, they're inside the fascia. They're not outside, they're inside it. So the fascia now had gotten distorted a little bit. And remember that fascia goes from your forehead all the way down your back and all the way around to the back through the arch of the foot. That's where the plantar fasciitis was coming from. That's what the body was feeling the pain, but the problem was in C1, C2. And also I had to go in and release some of the muscles in the jaw. And that allowed the tension to release the C1, C2, and then they were fine within 2 treatments.
That's amazing. And yeah, I'll just plug your plug there that I've sent a couple of people to your clinic in Victoria who have had back pain on and off for like decades, and working with a practitioner that's not only just looking at fascia, but looking at the whole body, rather than, let's just say, like a chiropractor who might just be looking at alignment, which is obviously very important, but releasing areas of the spine and creating that alignment, that straightness, which is, it has its place for sure. But I've never really experienced the type of relief that I think that I'm going to get from something like chiropractic work, because I'm focusing way too much on that particular area that's causing me discomfort, whether it's like my neck or my shoulders, rather than thinking of that, like that whole picture. So yeah, I completely agree that that holistic aspect, and just being able to have a viewpoint where you're not necessarily just like super homed in on that one particular area, and to have a practitioner that understands the body, understands the fascia. I don't think a lot of people who will be listening to this, or a lot of people who go and see not just allopathic practitioners, but also, holistic alternative practitioners as well, might not have the understanding yet of, what the fascia is and how impactful it is to the body and how super connected it is everywhere. And I just we've touched on a few. I think most people think that fascia is just this passive connective tissue, but research, as you've spoken about, certainly suggests it plays a heavily active role in the body. And we've talked about a few of the other functions beyond just kind of holding things together. And you've mentioned about like cell walls, that we have trillions of those, and how involved fascia is, and the connective tissue of that we have. Obviously collagen is the primary component of fascia, and we have collagen all over the body. Are there any other like key roles in which fascia plays a part in the body?
I'm glad you asked that question. One of the sayings that is commonly accepted now in most of the somatic trauma therapy is that the issues are always in the tissues.
Yeah.
They now know that the fascia, out of all the types of tissues in the body, the fascia is the one type of tissue that has the ability to hold actual memories within the tissue. So when somebody who is skilled in working in fascia starts to release the fascia, a lot of times, many times, emotions come up. If someone's been involved in a traumatic accident, and they happen to see the accident when it was happening, so they were consciously aware, like, oh my goodness, I'm about to get hurt.
Yeah.
Inside the tissue that got hurt, there will be a memory of that I'm being hurt. And it will come out as an emotion. It won't come out just as, it will be also increased blood flow, and, it might be even a fever, et cetera, but it will come out with tears, anger, rage, et cetera. When I work with people with MVAs, motor vehicle accidents, I always ask them, especially if they happen to know they were about to get hit, how angry are you? Are you feeling any anger? No, I'm not angry at all. Well, then that's not, there's anger in there. There's going to be anger in that body. Anger, fear, terror, something is going to be in there. So the fascia has a direct and also indirect influence on our mental states. From a very simplistic way of looking at it, if you take an organism and you reduce the blood flow, you take a person and you reduce their blood flow, you reduce the body's ability to eliminate toxins out of the body, that body no longer is at its optimum. And what that does, then, it starts to put a bit of a drag on the person. You get up in the morning, it's like, oh, man, I got to go do another day again. Or you get home at the end of the day and it's like, oh my goodness, I'm exhausted. You do that enough, week after week after month after month, that person is not experiencing joy. They're also not experiencing, they're not sharing with the people around them that they love the same level of commitment, the same level of, hey, I love you, I'm happy to be here. Yeah. That plays on the mental aspects of the person as well.
Well, I remember reading about, I think it was Dr. Emoto's work on water, and how water can be, it can react to negative words, emotions, even chaotic shapes. There's some fascinating research within that. And if you're, if our understanding of fascia, that it's made up of these layers of collagen and water, collagen and water, collagen and water, you expand that across the whole human body. There's a whole lot of water that's kind of like encapsulated within us. And when we're talking about the body's trauma response in regards to where it would store that trapped energy, it's got to go somewhere, right? And a lot of people, especially in a car accident or something traumatic happening to them, where they're in a situation where they can't actually process it being a car accident, or maybe when they're younger and they don't have the psychological development to actually go through what's actually happening to them. Makes a lot of sense to me that a lot of that would get trapped in these in the water within the tissues, and there's water absolutely everywhere. So that makes so much sense. And yeah, we've had some amazing somatic practitioners on the show that have discussed a few of these things, but we've not yet kind of had that connection in regards to trauma and fascia and having those issues within the tissues. Yeah, I love that. That's great.
I know a lot of trauma therapists are now starting to incorporate into their practices movement therapy, solely for the purpose, like you mentioned, about bringing the emotions out of the fascia. I should just do a little plug here for two groups of people or two groups of therapists that are quite skilled in fascia. They're called Rolfers. Rolfing was named after Ida Rolf. She was the woman that invented sort of the very systematic way of working on fascia out of California in the 1970s. So Rolfers are one group. The other group is people that practice something called structural integration. They're very similar. They all work on fascia, and both of them work on a series, either of 10 sessions or I think 12 sessions is the other group. But I've gone through those sessions myself, and it fundamentally changed how I run. I mean, like I mentioned, I've been running marathons. I don't run marathons anymore, but I still run on a weekly basis. And I noticed about halfway through the 10 sessions, my running style got terrible. Like it really changed. And I called the person up. I said, "Hey, what have you done to me? Like, I'm not running as well as I used to." And in her wisdom, she said, just hang in there, let it reintegrate. And sure enough, after session 6, I was running much more gracefully, much more efficiently as well. So I actually improved in my running capabilities. So those two groups are really skilled in working on fascia. If anybody's looking at wanting to do a really deep dive into getting their fascia open, and anyone that's had so who would be appropriate for this? If you're a woman, you've had a C-section, hands down right away, that is a big red flag. Your fascia has to be worked on. If you've ever broken a bone, the amount of kinetic energy it takes to break a bone, everybody focuses on the broken bone. You get the cast, and then they get the cast off, and away you go. But that amount of energy to break a bone, can you only imagine what it's doing to the tissue?
Yeah.
And that often gets ignored. And then 2 years later, 3 years later, the person's not moving, or, they're not playing tennis as well anymore, or they're not any of their physical pursuits they want to do. They're not able to do it anymore. And they think, oh, it's because I broke my bone. Well, yes, but it's also because the fascia was never addressed.
And there has to be a ripple effect to something like that, where I broke my shoulder when I was 20 playing soccer, and there has to, not just obviously where the bone's broken, but there has to be a ripple effect of that energy going through other parts of the bone, other parts of the muscle, other parts of the fascia that's going to extend beyond the actual break itself.
Right.
And it just only makes sense to me that you have to look at the surrounding, or the whole body essentially, but also especially the surrounding tissue, not just like focusing exclusively on the tear or the break.
Exactly. That's a good point to mention, Simon, about, let's use you as an example. So you mentioned you broke your left clavicle, was it?
My right clavicle, yeah.
Or your right clavicle. So when the energy comes in, whatever it was, person's head or ball or whatever it was that came in, there's an amount of kinetic energy that comes in, it breaks the bone, but that energy keeps traveling through the body until it hits the far wall. In that case, that would be the opposite, be your scapula, your shoulder blade. And there, that energy bangs into the scapula and causes also damage, and then reverberates back towards you again, bounces back the same way. So you get this bounce effect. And as a therapist, you have to know, okay, that's why I always ask, how did you fall? Where did you hit? Because the opposite side of the body has been taking a big brunt of that kinetic energy, and that has to be addressed as well.
Yeah, I mean, it still bothers me sometimes now, like if I'm going to lift weights, like heavy weights, like my right side will give out way quicker than my left side. So I've never really done any particular work to deal with it. So I imagine even though that happened 20 years ago, I very strongly believe there's things I could do right now that could actually like help regain, re-strengthen, and loosen up that area.
You work on that fascia, get somebody who's skilled in getting around all that fascia around the clavicle, around your neck, around, because your lungs, don't forget your lungs. If you take your fingers and you push them right up the top of your clavicles, right there, that's the top of your lungs right there.
Yeah.
Right. So that pleura is the pleura around the lungs extends from the top of your lungs, big bag, all the right way around the lungs, comes right down to the bottom of your diaphragm and attaches right into your diaphragm. So there's that connectiveness right there. You got, damage up here on the clavicle, impacts on the pleura, wraps around the lungs, goes down to the diaphragm. The diaphragm's a big, massive piece of fascia. And then on and on it goes. I can keep drawing you lines of connections from the diaphragm to the liver to the spleen, all the way down through. So if you got somebody who knows how to work on that, it won't be one session, but if they're skilled enough, they'll work probably from, your pelvis all the way up through your neck to the top of your head to release just from that one single impact.
Beautiful. I'd love to talk about maybe chronic health conditions and the fascial connection. And here at Truehope, we have our flagship product here, Empower Plus, is the world's most researched broad spectrum micronutrient formula, and for good reason too. And we find that so many people who are chronically depressed or anxious or deal with even more significant psychological disorders, they're so significantly undernourished within their brain and their body. And when they start consuming a product that, especially the minerals that are chelated in such a way that they can actually pass through the blood-brain barrier and impact the brain and begin re-nourishing the brain, very quickly, these individuals who have been on countless medications for sometimes decades, they start to feel significantly better very, very quickly. And sometimes days. People describe the black cloud lifting from their mind. And it just makes me think about the undercare, the under maintenance of our fascial tissues, and obviously the nourishment aspect as well. It's an alive organism with biochemical reactions happening all the time. Things need to come out of there that need to get eliminated. Things need to come in there that need to repair. What do you think the connections between chronic health conditions and fascial dysregulation?
That's a really good question.
Thanks.
You're welcome. And so anything chronic, let's talk about what chronic means for a minute. Our cells, through the DNA in the cells, our cells are constantly trying to self-regulate into some sort of balance. That's what they're wired. They can't wake up one day and say, you know what, I don't think I'm going to work today. I'm going to go off and just do something goofy. There's always a reason why the cells can't self-regulate. So when people talk about chronic, when I think of chronic, that's where the cells have become so dysregulated, they can't get back to balance anymore. So then you've got to look at, okay, what's causing that imbalance and that inability to regain that balance? The fascia plays a big part in almost anything that's chronic because, again, the fascia is, because it's everywhere, it's also wrapping around all of your arteries, all of your veins, all of your lymphatics. And as you know, the lymphatic system is basically the garbage collectors of the body. And so when the fascia starts to tighten up, distort, get too loose, think of somebody who's carrying an extra 20 or 30 pounds in the front of their belly. That fascia is now stretched right out of shape, and it's no longer doing its job of holding the organs in the right place. So the organs are now shifting a little bit from that pull. Or think of somebody who maybe has been drinking maybe too much alcohol or eating too much highly processed foods. Let's go there for a second. If you're eating highly processed foods, ultra refined foods, that's putting such a level of toxicity into your system that your liver and your kidneys are not going to handle it. There's just no way. These are I don't even want to call them foods, actually. These are chemicals that have been engineered in a laboratory to mimic foods and to trick your brain into thinking you want to eat more of them. And so when the body's just not used to that, doesn't know what to do with them. So those things start to build up a lot of level of toxicity. And in all those scenarios I just described, they essentially put a really big, heavy load on the cells. Something is going to become chronically out of balance. I don't even like the word disease. Like, people come in and say to me, oh, I have MS, or I have IBS. I had somebody in the office just recently come in and say, I've got SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And I looked at this person and I said, don't take this the wrong way, but I don't believe in SIBO. I believe in the symptoms that you're experiencing. I get that, they're real, but that label of SIBO, that's just a silly label. What does that mean? Anyways, back to your original question was, yes, anything that's chronic will have an element where the fascia is definitely involved, absolutely involved. And then the problem is, once the fascia gets distorted, what can a person do about that? right? It's great to get on, the remedies that you're mentioning, the nutrients that you've got in Truehope. They'll help a lot. Any of those types of things will help immensely to get the body back into balance physiologically. But if the fascia is out of balance and distorted, it'll just keep throwing it out of balance. So then the question is, what do you do about that?
Yeah, you made me think of the myelin sheath there in regards to our nervous system, kind of wrapped around the nerves, and when that becomes that wrapper that you were talking about with the fascia around everything. Once that myelin sheath or that fascial wrapper becomes damaged or rigid or whatever, dysfunctional, the structure or the organ within that is inevitably going to suffer. And we obviously see, funny enough, you mentioned MS in the myelin sheath there, but it makes a lot of sense that you could see systemic issues all over the body, considering how heavily involved the fascia is all over the place. And there's organs wrapping around all of it. There's arteries, there's nerves. It's so extensive that you can't not have a fascial practice in your life. It sounds like to me, like I thought the fascia was hugely important before we had this conversation, but now it's like I clearly need to have some tools in my locker to be able to make sure that I'm 40 years old. I'm not getting any younger. I still like to be very active. So I have to be working with these tissues that are certainly going to, they're going to get less, I don't want to say quality, but as I get older, it's just the way it goes, right? These aren't going to be functioning like I was when I was 20. I'm not going to have that recovery.
Well, hold on for a second. Be careful with that whole idea that as we age, we get worse. That's actually not true.
Okay.
You can be 80 years old and still be bouncing around with lots of vitality. The problem is that most of us collect way too many toxins as we age, and that ages us.
Yeah.
So I'm really working on the idea that I'm 66 now. I plan on being 86 and still out running in the mountains behind my on the island here, trail running. I plan on still practicing my martial arts, and I think it's quite possible as long as we, like you said, address the fascia and keep everything mobile and moving. So that kind of leads into the part that I'm really excited about of this chat, Simon, is what can someone like yourself do at home? I'll come around. I'll come around that in a second. Let me just segue into this by saying one of the big misnomers that a lot of people have is that we can stretch a muscle. You can't stretch a muscle. That's actually physiologically impossible to stretch a muscle. And let me clarify. Let me sort of be very clear on that. What allows a muscle to stretch is your signals coming from the central nervous system that says to the actin and myosin. Like if you were to, for your listeners, picture taking two bags of spaghetti and bringing those ends of spaghetti together so they overlap each other. That's actin and myosin. That's how the muscles contract and relax. The only thing that allows that muscle to start to relax is a signal from your central nervous system. If you take a bicep muscle, go back to that muscle again, it's been damaged a little bit and it only opens so far. You can't stretch your arm right out because of the damage in the bicep. You can take your other arm or put a weight into it or a pulley and you can force it open. What you're doing there is you're tearing the muscle fiber. The central nervous system's not actively involved in letting go of it. So you're just tearing it. And what'll happen is when you do that, I see people doing it in the gym all the time. I see people doing it in physio. They tear it open. It feels good because the natural endorphins come in, it kills all the pain, and they think, oh, that's great. Look at my arm. It goes all the way open. They get up the next morning and it's just as tight again. And they do this month after month after month. So if you really want to work with your fascia and you want to really open the body up, you've got to allow the central nervous system to be an active participant in that movement. And what I mean by that is you take whatever it is, let's say your back is stiff, you bend forward or whatever kind of stretch you're going to do, and you only go to the range where you start to feel that stiffness. And you stop there and you stay there and you breathe deeply. Breathe, breathe, breathe. And what'll happen eventually is the central nervous system is going to go, oh, look at that. We're safe here. This feels okay. Why don't we let some of this actin and myosin stretch out a little bit? And it'll creep. And you'll notice after 30 seconds or a minute that you're now not feeling the same tension that you created by the initial movement. You think, oh, okay, let me go forward a little bit more. And you go forward just enough that you re-engage into that feeling again. And again, you stop and you breathe. Now, I've been using this methodology for decades, both in my own personal life and my practice. And recently, about 8 months ago, I started practicing yoga. And as I'm practicing yoga, the first 4 or 5 classes, I was falling all over the place. But eventually, I got to the point where I could actually feel the movements. I thought, my goodness, this is the same kind of stretching that I've been talking about in my practice. Yoga is a very good example of mindfully moving the body slowly with breath through a way that actually honors the integrity of the body. So someone like yourself at home, Simon, before you go play a game of soccer, or after, particularly afterwards, if you were to get on the floor and just start stretching your body, and don't make it complicated, just stretch your body wherever you feel any of the stiffness, any way you want, stretch it out, but don't overstretch it. Move it into the place of resistance and breathe.
Yeah,
Now you're working with fascia.
I like that. And I've got an example in regards to what you're talking there about the nervous system understanding that it's safe in a place where you might think it's not, and to hold it there and breathe. Like I've started to do a lot more hip work, a lot more glute work, and a lot more hamstrings. That's just, if I stretch those, I don't have any back pain. And I've been listening to this really great guy from the UK. I think his name's Tom Merrick, but he's got a really great YouTube channel for all sorts of incredible stretches. And I'm doing a session, like a follow along video with this guy on YouTube, just at home. And he'll say, like, just before we do this exercise, you're likely going to feel cramp. And whenever I would feel cramp, I would just like move immediately out of the movement and just stop. But he was explaining that, like, that cramp that you might feel, you kind of need to, the best way to do is to like breathe with it and be with it, and allow your body, your central nervous system, to recognize that it is safe in that area. And it needs to be able to kind of just like let go. I'm not saying you're going to have a full extension of whatever you're doing or full flexion, but it's important to have that conversation kind of with your central nervous system, to not immediately react to the pain or the cramp, and to avoid doing it. But that's probably an area in which you could focus on.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Now that you know that fascia in your hamstrings and your back is all connected from the toes all the way to your forehead, then you start to incorporate some other stretching, like maybe rolling into a bit of a ball, laying on your back and bringing your knees up, bringing your head forward, and just, breathing into that kind of overall Tom Myers chain of fascia. Start stretching it out as well. And if you were to approach it that way, I would be really surprised to hear that in within a month, your hamstrings are not going to be as tight. Right? If you focus just on the hamstrings, you're only focusing on one small part of that fascia. Or if you were to focus on the whole line, then you're really going to open yourself up.
Oh, 100%. With my lower back, my left lower back, basically from carrying 2 kids, I've got a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, and my 3-year-old is like 46 pounds. He's ridiculously heavy, and he's been heavy forever. Okay. So I feel it on my left side of my back. But if I just stretch my hamstrings, it doesn't do it. If I just stretch my quads or my calves, it doesn't do it. I have to stretch. I have to do all of it. I have to do all of it for the back to be able to let go and release, because obviously everything's so interwoven and connected that kind of has to happen. And I'm just being cautious with the time here. I know we've got to keep it under a certain limit here, because I know you've got to get going here, but I want to make sure that we provide some good practical tips here for our listeners who are certainly connecting with what we're talking about here. They might not know that they've specifically got a fascial issue, but I'm sure there are some things that they can be doing at home, or even maybe you can recommend how to find a good fascial practitioner or an osteopathic practitioner. But maybe you can just start with maybe some practical tips for people that they can literally do today.
Okay. So the biggest one, of course, and you mentioned this, you alluded to this at the beginning of the session, was hydration. Now, the problem with hydration is, as you mentioned also, if you don't have the minerals in your body to absorb that water, then you are just going to be passing that water right through yourself. Yeah. If you find you're somebody who drinks water and within 10 or 15, 20 minutes, you're urinating it out again, that's a really good indicator that you're missing some minerals. So this is where, the Truehope chelated minerals comes into effect. That would help. Something really simple is to take a couple grains of unrefined sea salt, put a couple grains under your tongue when you get up in the morning, and drink a big glass of water slowly and sip it, and let that salt dissolve under your tongue. That will also supply minerals and can help you to hydrate up. So staying hydrated is obviously the really important thing. Staying away from things that dehydrate you. So coffee first thing in the morning when you get up is disastrous for your fascia. Not only does it dehydrate you, but it also releases a huge amount of adrenaline and cortisol into your system. Coffee does not give us energy. Coffee gives us large amounts of adrenaline and cortisol, most often at the inappropriate time of the day, and that's first thing in the morning. So that's something else somebody could do. Move your coffee intake from right away in the morning to about an hour after you've gotten up. And in the meantime, have yourself a big glass of water, whether it's warm water or don't do cold water, but warm water or a room temp water. That's one thing. And then the other thing is start looking at if you don't have a stretching routine, there's a problem right there. So you need to, even if you're somebody who doesn't do any particularly active sports, but like you said, if you're a parent that's carrying a child around on your hip, or you're somebody that goes buys groceries and you got to carry the groceries home, you want to make sure that you stretch your body out. Whether that's something that's coordinated, like going to yoga or Tai Chi or Qigong, or whether it's just getting on the living room floor at the end of the night and going through some very simple, basic movements with your breath, nice and gentle and slow, and stretching the body out. If you do that every night, within a week or two, you're going to also start changing your sleeping patterns. Just by opening the body up, stretching, incorporating the breath, increasing some blood flow, you're going to sleep better because of that. So, and that's another simple practical tip. And I guess the last one, and I keep coming back to this because it is so huge in North America, is if you're eating a diet that is heavily invested in ultra-processed foods, you're really impacting negatively on not only your whole body, but also on the fascia.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think that if you were to take out alcohol and take out processed sugars and refined seed oils, and first thing in the morning, rehydrate your body and remineralize your body, you're going to notice significant impacts right away, whether that's better sleep, better energy, better digestion, just like, all over the map, you're going to experience better health. That's awesome, Cameron. I don't know, is there one particular takeaway about fascia and its role in our health that you maybe want our listeners to remember?
Yeah, I guess the one takeaway would be that fascia is involved in every single thing that you're doing. And if you are not happy with how you're doing your life, there's pain, there's discomfort, there's incoordination, there's lopsidedness, there's anything that you're not happy with how you use your body or how much energy you have at the end of the day or lack of energy at the end of the day, then you've really got to start looking at your fascia. That's part of an overall holistic approach. And there are some really good, like I mentioned earlier, some good practitioners. Structural integration is one type of therapy. And then there's also Rolfing. Those are the two kind of branches of fascial workers. And many massage therapists, an osteopath like myself, we're all trained in fascial work as well. I don't approach it the same way in that sort of systematic stepping way that structural integration practitioners do. But I still work on the fascia throughout the entire body. So again, find somebody who can also do that kind of work for you as well, and you'll have a much more comprehensive approach.
Amazing, Cameron. Thank you so much. And if you want to connect with Cameron, I'll leave links in the show notes, but it's coastalintegratedhealth.ca. And I wanted to let people know, because I think a lot of what we're talking about, I think fascial work should be a foundational part of everybody's health. And on Cameron's website, which you can hit the link in the show notes, he's got some amazing courses about how you can improve your immunity, improve your sleep. There's a women and men's fertility course on there as well. And it's all very simple, habitual, foundational things that you can do to improve those parts of your life. And I think that's very, very important to highlight, is just those foundational pieces, which are often very cheap, very simple, can have radical changes within your life for the better. So I'll leave a link there that you can check more of that out. But I know Cameron's got some amazing online educational resources that you can go in there and check that. And also from that link, you can connect with Cameron as well if you've got any further questions. I know he'd be more than delighted to talk about it with you, and I'll make sure that we get those links to some of those individuals. Tom Myers, for example, if you want to extend your understanding of fascial work. And I think that I'm going to do that personally, because I think it's a very important part that's missing in everybody's life.
Great.
Beautiful.
Thank you, Simon. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, I was just gonna close out there, but you did it beautifully for me. But thank you again, Cameron, for coming onto the show. I really appreciate it. That is it for this episode of Truehope Cast, the official podcast of Truehope Canada. I want to thank Cameron for coming back on the show. I think this might be his third time on Truehope Cast, which is absolutely fantastic. Another incredible topic. I think fascia is so important. I'm lucky I got to learn a lot about it today. But yeah, everything you need to know is in the show notes if you want to connect through any more resources. That is it for this week. We'll see you soon.